Hello and welcome to another episode of MNM Mindset and Muscle. In today's video, we are going to be covering one of the most requested muscle groups on the top 3 do's and top 3 do nots, and that is chest training. What do I recommend that you do, and what do I recommend that you avoid in order to maximize your chest training and therefore maximize chest growth? Now, we have already covered back, we have covered shoulders, we have covered biceps, we have covered triceps. So make sure you go back and check out those videos if you are looking for the top 3 do's and don'ts of those muscle groups. But today we are going to dive into chest. So as always with any of the muscle groups, let's get a quick flash of a picture of a chest anatomy chart just so you're able to see what the muscle group looks like when we dive into this video. So check it out. Now that you've got an idea of what the chest looks like anatomically, let's dive in with the first do. Do number 1, do train chest with a variety of angles, and with angles that you are able to get the best feel in the chest and the best contraction. So basically, the chest can be trained from a multiple of angles, the 3 most basic ones being some variation of an incline. Now I will usually start off my workout, or at least my first heavy compound movement, with some form of incline press, as this is a fantastic way to build up that pec shelf and work the upper chest. I don't recommend using too steep of an incline. As you'll see here, I believe I'm on the second to lowest incline setting on the bench, but it's up to you to try different inclines and see which one you're able to connect with best. As soon as I go too steep on the incline, I feel the exercise a lot more in my shoulders. Here I show on the second set my setup, where I make sure to retract my shoulders back like I'm pinching a pencil between my shoulder blades, and then down, engaging my lats slightly to keep everything stable. From there, I find my grip comfortably on the bar, and then keeping my chest elevated and out and my shoulders back and down to maximize the tension on the chest, I unrack and move into this exercise. Incline dumbbells, incline hammer strength, incline barbell, and incline Smith machine presses are all fantastic exercises to work that upper chest and build thick pecs. A flat movement, as I'll touch on in just a minute, I prefer slight decline position in my flat presses. And you'll notice I do that by really pulling my shoulders back, sticking my chest up, and actually pushing my heels into the floor to create a slight bridging effect on the bench. And what this does is it allows me to put my shoulder in a safer position and really feel a better contraction. Again, that's up to you to see which position you're able to connect with the most. Any sort of flat dumbbell, flat barbell, flat machine press, flat hammer strength press are great exercises for you to really focus on building that meat of the pectorals and moving a lot of weight while progressively overloading. And a decline movement. Now, I typically do not train with a specific decline movement, nor do I usually recommend it for clients, as most people need to bring up their upper chest to really get that shelf. And any of the flat presses typically covers that full middle portion of the pec and works the lower pec as well. So what I will do is on flat press exercises is I will actually bridge my body just slightly, lifting my chest, lifting my hips just a little bit to create a very, very shallow, slight decline. Now, this isn't so much to target the lower chest or to emphasize that, but I personally feel a much better contraction when my hand comes from shoulder height down across my body and finishes at the lower chest. So rather than bench pressing straight up with a flat barbell or flat dumbbell press, I'll create that slight bridge effect, so I'm on just a slight decline, and I get a much better mind to muscle connection in the chest and a much better contraction at the top. This is something you should experiment with. Experiment with different angles of the incline bench, from a little bit steeper of an incline to a more shallow incline. Experiment with a slight decline versus a flat press, and see which angles work best for you. What gives you the best contraction? You can also play with this just by bringing your two hands in front of you together, contracting the chest, pressing your hands together, and then moving your hands up and down and feeling where you're able to get the best squeeze. When my hands are crossing my lower chest or just below my chest, I'm able to feel an excellent contraction across the entire pec. Once I get up to the mid portion of the chest, I tend to lose that contraction. So I don't like to do any direct flat work. I like to create that shallow decline, as not only do I get a better mind to muscle connection, but this also puts your shoulder in a safer position, a more natural position to do what the chest is supposed to do, and that is to bring the arm down and across the body. Now, our first do not worry about maxing out if your goal is muscle mass. So the bench press is one of the most common exercises that everyone wants to know your max lift. I get asked this all the time, almost daily, and a typical question from a bro is, how much do you bench? Meaning, what's your maximal lift? What can you lift for one repetition? Now, this can be fine if powerlifting is your goal, if you do this safely, or if your goal is just to see how much you can bench press. But as far as building hypertrophy, that is muscle growth, this is not going to help at all. You want to be training at the very lowest in the 4 or so repetition range, from my experience, and typically more in the 6 to 10 repetition range, reaching failure somewhere in there with your heavy compound movements, and the 10 to 15 or so repetition range with more isolation exercises, such as cable crossovers, pec deck, or fly movements. Do number 2. Do use cable, flies, or pec decks, any sort of fly movement to isolate the chest, either as a pre-exhaust or a finishing movement, or in often cases, both. If you have trouble with that mind to muscle connection in the chest and you tend to feel presses more in your shoulders or in your triceps, then I highly advise you to find some sort of cable crossover or pec deck machine where you're really able to get a good isolation and feel for the chest, and do a few sets on that. Nothing too crazy. You don't need to go to failure and do a bunch of drop sets there. You just want to be able to get that good neurological mind to muscle connection of the chest, get a good pump going so that when you move into the pressing movements, you're able to continue to feel your chest stretch and contract throughout those movements and get the most out of them. If you finish with an exercise, I also like to finish with a great pump of some variation of a cable crossover or a pec deck to really get a good squeeze in. You don't usually have to go as heavy with these exercises, so it's great for the end of the workout as well when you're already taxed from the several compound lifts. You can find your favorite fly variation, be it dumbbell flies, cable crossovers, pec decks, or for me, by far my favorite and the best connection that I get is with this seated crossover variation. That allows me to really stabilize myself so I'm not using my core or wobbling around on my legs trying to keep my balance as I use heavy weight with the crossover. I can really focus just on stretching the chest and contracting the chest and controlling the weight. Now, dumbbell flies are a great exercise for the stretch, but keep in mind you do lose tension at the top portion of the movement. So give them a try, but I feel better constant tension using the cables or using the pec deck while having less pain in my shoulders than the dumbbell causes. Do not, number 2, do not use flies as the majority of your workout. So we already touched on what flies are good for. They're good to warm up, get a good mind-muscle connection, a good pump going. They're great to finish off the muscle with a great pump, good squeeze, contraction, all of that. However, I see a lot of people in the gym, usually the very skinny people who don't make any progress in their chest development, where the majority of their chest workout is cable crossover variations. They'll start with the cables low to the ground and do low cable crossover movements, which is debatable how well that works the chest in the first place, as you don't really have any sort of stability on that exercise, and the front delts and biceps tend to take over. but then they'll do like 3 or 4 sets with the low cable crossovers. Then they'll raise the cables to the middle, do 3 or 4 sets to the middle, raise the cables up, do 3 to 4 sets coming up and down. So before you know it, they've done 9 to 10, 12 sets just of cable crossovers before moving on to some sort of machine press or maybe even a machine pec deck, which is just another fly movement to finish off their chest workout. Now, while cables are great, as I already mentioned, they are not going to be your major mass builders because you're not going to be able to progressively overload nearly as strong on these. This puts your chest in a much weaker position because you don't have the triceps and shoulders involved as the secondary muscle groups. So mass building movements, your best ones are going to be heavy pressing movements that you can progressively overload on and really feel the muscle work. Use those flies to warm up, get a mind-muscle connection, use those flies to finish, but save at least a couple mass building compound pressing movements as the meat and potatoes of your workout. That should be your emphasis if your goal is muscle building. Our final do for chest. Do warm up your shoulders and elbows before moving into any sort of chest exercises, and do include a couple warm-up sets when you're moving into heavy pressing movements. This is vital, as especially any sort of flat pressing movement can put your shoulders in a vulnerable position, and your elbows, your triceps, your shoulders are all so involved in stabilizing you for any sort of pressing movements. It's very important to make sure those areas are warmed up and loosened up properly before moving into your heavy compound movements. Again, when you get to any sort of bench press, incline press, or machine pressing movements, I recommend doing 1 to 2 warm-up sets, just depending on how warm you already are, before moving into your actual working sets. Now, with a warming set, I'll touch on real quick, you don't want to go anywhere near failure. I see a lot of people make the mistake where if they're bench pressing, let's say they're working up to 315 pounds. They'll start with 135 and then they'll do like 20 repetitions with 135 to the point where they're burned out and barely able to do another rep. Then they'll do 185 and they'll do 12 to 15 repetitions there. Then they'll do 225 for 10 repetitions, and then they'll do 285 or 275 for a few repetitions before moving into 315. By the time they get to their actual working weight, their chest is going to be exhausted from doing so many repetitions and going close to failure on 4 sets before you're actually doing the progressive overloading set that is going to trigger that muscle growth. So rather than doing that, start with the 135, do maybe 6 to 10 reps. Then move up to the 185 and do maybe 4 to 6 reps. Move up to the 225, do maybe 3 or 4 reps. Move up to the 275 for 1 or 2, and then you're ready to go with your 315. Our final do not for chest. Do not train chest directly after or the day after you train a secondary muscle group for heavy pressing movements, this being your shoulders or your triceps. If your focus is on chest growth or it's lagging behind or any way, or really in any case scenario, I would recommend training chest earlier in the week if it's a priority, and never train chest directly around shoulders or triceps. This is because your shoulders and triceps are so involved in stabilizing and as the secondary muscle groups for any sort of heavy pressing movements. If you train shoulders and triceps one day and come in to train chest the next day, your chest is not going to be able to get the full stimulation because your already fatigued shoulders and triceps will give out on you far before your chest is able to reach failure. I'll throw in a little bonus for you as well. Something that helped me bring up my chest is it took me a couple years to figure out that just moving heavy weight on the bench press wasn't the key to stimulating chest growth. And that is to really be able to get the most out of each and every rep of your chest. You have to have intention. You have to be able to focus the tension through the muscle, in this case, the chest, that you're looking to train. So you can do that through a couple ways. First off, I do like doing some sort of flexing or posing in between sets where you're squeezing your chest muscles, holding, squeeze, 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 and really develop that mind to muscle connection in between sets, especially during the warm up, so that you're able to feel those heavy sets later that much more in your chest. Another thing to focus on, especially if you're using a machine or any sort of barbell, is inward intention during the movement. This means when you're grabbing the barbell or the handles on the machine, you're actually going to be actively shoving your hands, gripping the bar and shoving your hands inward on the bar to create that contraction. Since you are gripping the bar or gripping the handles of the machine, your hands won't move at all, but by actively trying to push them inwards, you're going to be engaging the chest the same way as if you were to take your hands together and press them together in the front of your body. So make sure you keep that tension on the chest, and this is a great way to do it. Make sure as well when you're doing any sort of pressing movement that you are keeping your rib cage high and your chest out, so the tension is more likely to go through the chest rather than the shoulders. As soon as you start to slump over or let your shoulders round forward, they're going to take over. There's so many keys to training chest correctly, a lot of other things that I typically go over when I write clients' workouts, when I check in with them to make sure that they're optimally getting the most out of their chest training. But for today, that covers the 3 do's and 3 do nots that first come to my mind when it comes to chest training. If you have any questions or if you think I missed something, please let me know in the comment section down below and I will get to it as soon as I can. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.